8 weddings, 7 husbands, 1 woman who refused to stay broken. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just collect rings, she chased something the rest of us spend a lifetime running from. May 1950. 18-year-old Elizabeth Taylor steps out of a Rolls-Royce in a dress stitched with 25 yards of satin and a smile rehearsed in 1,000 mirrors. The groom is Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., heir to a hotel empire, boyishly handsome and already halfway through a bottle of champagne. MGM paid for the cake, the flowers, the 3,000 guests. They called it America's Royal Wedding. Elizabeth called it her launch party into adulthood. It lasted 205 days. Behind the honeymoon smiles, Nick drank hard and hit harder. In Paris, he backhanded her across a hotel suite because she laughed too loud at someone else's joke. In Hollywood, he grabbed her wrist so tight the bracelet cut skin. The studio hushed it up, sent her to rest in a private clinic, and told reporters she had nervous exhaustion. Elizabeth learned her first brutal lesson. A ring can lock a door from the inside. She divorced him in January 1951, walked away with $1,500 and a mouthful of secrets she'd never tell her mother. The paper screamed, "Teen bride jilted." She read the headlines, lit a cigarette, and decided no man would ever own her pain again. 9 months later, she married Michael Wilding, 20 years older, gentle, British, safe. He called her "my little one," tucked her into bed when the nightmares came, and never once raised his voice. They had 2 sons, quiet Christmases, and 5 years of calm. But calm started to feel like drowning in slow motion. Elizabeth's star was rising so fast the sky cracked open. Michael wanted rose gardens and early bedtimes. She wanted the world on fire. By 1956, she was restless, reckless, and ready to burn the house down herself. She left Michael with kindness and a broken heart. 2 husbands before 25. The world labeled her flighty. She labeled herself free. Then came Mike Todd, loud, fearless, larger than life. He crashed into her world like a meteor and promised her the moon. For once, she believed a man might actually deliver.
Mike Todd didn't walk into a room. He detonated it. He was 46, cigar-chomping, Jewish, twice divorced, and the only producer in Hollywood who could make MGM and 20th Century Fox beg at the same table. When he met Elizabeth in 1956, she was still technically married to Michael Wilding, but the marriage was a corpse nobody had buried yet. Todd didn't care about technicalities. He looked at her across a crowded party, pointed a thick finger, and announced loud enough for the bartender to hear, "You're too gorgeous to be sad. Come with me, baby. I'm going to make you laugh until you pee." She laughed so hard champagne came out her nose. Nobody had ever talked to Elizabeth Taylor like that, like she was a woman, not a monument. 3 weeks later, he flew her to Chicago in his private plane, a Lockheed Lodestar he'd christened the Lucky Liz. Over Lake Michigan, he handed her the controls and said, "Fly it, kid." She was terrified and exhilarated. The plane wobbled like a drunk swan, but Todd just whooped and kissed her so hard the co-pilot blushed. That night in a suite at the Ambassador East, he slid a 33-carat diamond on her finger and told her, "I don't want to marry an actress, I want to marry the storm." They married on February 2, 1957 in Acapulco. Elizabeth wore a simple hooded dress. Todd wore a grin that could power Las Vegas. Debbie Reynolds and her husband Eddie Fisher were the witnesses. Nobody in the world thought this one would last either, except the 2 people saying, "I do," under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. For 13 months, they lived at the volume of a Broadway opening night. Todd threw parties that started at midnight and ended at noon the next day. He bought her a Rolls-Royce painted the exact violet of her eyes. He flew plane loads of orchids from Hawaii because she once said she liked the smell. When she filmed Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, he showed up on set with a bathtub full of iced champagne and dared Paul Newman to a drinking contest. Elizabeth had never felt so alive. On August 3, 1957, she gave birth to their daughter, Liza, by emergency C-section. Todd paced the hospital corridor smoking 2 cigars at once. When the doctor said both mother and baby were fine, he dropped to his knees in the hallway and cried like a child. He kept promising her the world, and for once the world listened. His movie, Around the World in 80 Days, swept the Oscars, and Todd threw the most legendary party in Academy history: elephants in the parking lot, champagne fountains, Elizabeth on his arm in a white mink coat, and nothing underneath but a smile. Then, on March 22, 1958, he kissed her goodbye in their Beverly Hills mansion and boarded the Lucky Liz for a quick flight to New York. He was planning a party for 20,000 people in Madison Square Garden to celebrate their first anniversary. Elizabeth begged to go with him. She had a cold, felt uneasy, but he told her to rest. "Save your strength, baby. I'm bringing the moon home for you." The plane exploded over New Mexico at 2:17 a.m. There were no survivors. Elizabeth heard the news on the radio before the studio could reach her. She screamed so hard the maid thought someone was murdering her. They sedated her with enough barbiturates to kill a horse. For days, she lay in bed refusing food, clutching the diamond ring he'd given her the first night they met. When Debbie Reynolds came to comfort her, Elizabeth looked up with hollow eyes and whispered, "I finally found the love of my life, and God took him away to prove I can't have it." The funeral was a circus, thousands of fans, flashbulbs, Elizabeth veiled in black, collapsing into the arms of her third husband's best friend, Eddie Fisher. The world expected her to crumble. Instead, something colder and fiercer woke up inside her. She was 26 years old, a widow with 3 children by 3 different men, and the most famous woman on earth. Grief carved her open, but it also handed her a new rule. If love was going to be taken away, she would grab it harder, faster, louder, before fate could blink. And Eddie Fisher, quiet, married, loyal Eddie, who had held her hand at the graveside, was already looking at her like she was the only light left in the world. She didn't stand a chance against what came next, neither did he.
1959. America still thought of itself as a country that went to church on Sundays and kept its panties on. Then, Elizabeth Taylor stole Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart, and the entire nation lost its goddamn mind. It started at Mike Todd's grave. Eddie, still married to Debbie, still wearing his wedding ring, held Elizabeth while she sobbed into the dirt. Photographers caught the moment. The widow in black clinging to her dead husband's best friend. The next day, the headlines screamed, "Liz steals Debbie's husband," in letters so big they could be read from space. Eddie left Debbie and their 2 toddlers with a note that basically said, "Sorry, I'm in love with a hurricane." Debbie smiled bravely for the cameras and told Hedda Hopper, "I'm just a simple girl from Kansas." Elizabeth didn't even pretend to be sorry. She told reporters, "Mike's dead. Eddie makes me laugh. What the hell do you want from me?" The public wanted blood. Congress denounced her on the floor of the House. The Vatican called her an erotic vagrant. Fan mail arrived by the truckload, half of it perfumed love letters, half of it death threats written in crayon. Studios blacklisted her. Brands dropped her. Little old ladies in Iowa burned her photos in their driveways. But Elizabeth just lit another cigarette and said, "I'm not the first woman to take a man from his wife. I'm just the first one famous enough for you to notice." They married in Las Vegas on May 12, 1959, exactly 14 months after Mike Todd died. Elizabeth wore a dark green hood and a smile that looked like a dare. Eddie looked like a man who'd won the lottery and knew the ticket was about to explode in his pocket. For a while, it worked. Eddie worshipped her. He carried her pills in a silver box engraved, "For my baby." He converted to Judaism because she asked him to. He sang to her every night, even when his voice cracked from too many cigarettes and too much guilt. And Elizabeth, raw from grief, let herself believe that comfort could be love if you just closed your eyes tight enough. Then came Cleopatra. 20th Century Fox was bleeding money. They needed a miracle. They hired Elizabeth for $1 million, the first actress ever paid that much, and flew her to London. She arrived sick with meningitis, half dead, lungs filling with fluid. They drilled a hole in her skull to save her life. When she woke up with a shaved head and a tracheostomy scar, the world thought the movie was cursed. It was. Joseph Mankiewicz shot 1 million feet of film and still didn't have a movie. Costs skyrocketed past $40 million, more than the GDP of some countries. The crew hated her. The British weather hated her. And then Richard Burton strode onto the set in a dirty toga, hungover, snarling lines from Shakespeare like he was spitting teeth. Their first scene together, Cleopatra and Mark Antony meet on a golden barge. Elizabeth flubbed her line. Burton leaned in and whispered, "Darling, has anyone ever told you you're a very pretty girl?" The cameras weren't even rolling, but the air caught fire. From that moment, they were doomed, and they both knew it. They drank vodka for breakfast. They screamed at each other in Welsh and broken English. They disappeared into her dressing room for hours, while the crew pretended not to hear the furniture breaking. Eddie Fisher sat in the hotel bar downstairs, getting quietly drunk, telling anyone who would listen that his wife was just acting. One night, he walked in on them tangled on the floor of her trailer, clothes half on, mouths bleeding from kissing too hard. Elizabeth looked up and said, "Eddie, go home." He did. He always did. The affair became the loudest secret in history. Paparazzi camped outside her villa in Rome. Photos hit the front page. Elizabeth and Burton kissing in a speedboat, her hand inside his shirt, his hand somewhere the censors wouldn't allow. The Vatican excommunicated her again, this time personally, by name. Eddie finally filed for divorce in 1964, citing extreme cruelty. Elizabeth sent him a telegram, "Thanks for everything. Sorry about the mess." On March 15, 1964, 9 days after Eddie's divorce became final, Elizabeth married Richard Burton in Montreal. She wore yellow, fuck tradition, and a diamond brooch the size of a baby's fist. He wore a grin that said he'd stolen the crown jewels and didn't care who knew. The world called it the marriage of the century. They called it Tuesday. And for the next 10 years, they would love each other so violently, the walls would shake, the bottles would empty, and the whole planet would watch them try to kill each other with passion and still wake up reaching for the same bruised heart. But that war started with a single look on a fake barge in Rome, and it never really ended.
They didn't marry. They collided. March 1964. The Ritz-Carlton in Montreal smelled of snow and fresh money. Elizabeth walked down the aisle in hyacinths woven through her hair and a smile that looked like she'd just robbed a bank and enjoyed every second. Richard was already drunk, eyes bloodshot, voice thick with Welsh poetry and last night's gin. When the clerk asked if he took this woman, he answered, "I take her with 4 claws, mate. She's mine." The handful of witnesses laughed nervously. Elizabeth laughed like a woman hearing church bells in a thunderstorm. For the first 5 years, they were the most famous couple alive, and the least married people on earth. They bought a yacht called Charisma, Kate, Liza, Maria, the daughters they never quite managed to raise together, and sailed it like a floating battlefield. They drank enough vodka to drown small countries. They fought in 8 languages, sometimes inventing new swear words just for each other. In Puerto Vallarta, they built a house with a heart-shaped pool and separate wings connected by a pink bridge, because even when they couldn't stand each other, they couldn't stand being apart. Richard bought her jewels the way other men bought flowers. The Krupp diamond, 33 carats. The Peregrino pearl that once belonged to Spanish queens. The Taylor Burton diamond, 69 carats, cut like a tear. He'd toss them onto the bed after a fight and growl, "Put that on and come scream at me properly." She'd wear nothing but the diamonds and do exactly that. Hollywood tried to tame them and failed. The Taming of the Shrew, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, The Sandpiper. Every movie they made together was half love letter, half domestic violence in Technicolor. On the set of Virginia Woolf, George Segal watched them rip each other apart for 16 hours, then go home and finish the fight in real life. When the director yelled, "Cut," Richard kissed the blood off her lip and said, "That's my girl." They divorced the first time in June 1974, after 10 years of marriage and roughly 9.5 years of war. The official reason was irreconcilable differences. The real reason was simpler. They had started to hate the people they became when they were together. Richard was drinking a bottle of vodka before breakfast. Elizabeth was swallowing painkillers like candy. Their fights left holes in walls and scars on each other's souls. One night in Gstaad, he threw her across a room. The next morning, she woke up to find him asleep on the floor outside her locked door, crying in Welsh. She filed in Switzerland. He didn't contest it. They divided the diamonds, the houses, the dogs. Then they got drunk separately and cried in different countries. 16 months later, in October 1975, they remarried in a hut on the Chobe River in Botswana, barefoot, hungover, surrounded by elephants and a tribal chief who didn't speak English. Elizabeth wore a green dress and a grin that said, "We're idiots, but we're our idiots." Richard carried her over the threshold of a thatched hut and whispered, "Round 2, love." Round 2 lasted 10 months. The fights came back louder, the silences longer. The diamonds stayed in the vault, the vodka came out of it. In July 1976, they divorced again, this time quietly, in Haiti, signing papers on a table sticky with rum. Richard sent her a telegram the next day. "I left my heart in the divorce court. Please return it when you're finished breaking it." She kept the heart. She always did. By the end of the second divorce, Elizabeth was 44, twice widowed, twice divorced from the same man, mother of 4, grandmother of 1, and still the most beautiful woman anyone had ever seen. The world assumed she was finished with love. She wasn't even getting started.
After Richard left for the second and final time, Elizabeth did something nobody expected. She stopped running toward men and started walking toward herself. She was 44, half deaf from years of meningitis scars, overweight from steroids and heartbreak, and richer than most nations. The tabloids waited for her to collapse. Instead, she bought a mansion in Bel Air, filled it with rescue dogs, and got sober enough to notice the sunrise. For the first time since she was 12, no man was telling her who to be. Then came John Warner. He was a Virginia gentleman, former Secretary of the Navy, tall, polite, and running for Senate. They met at a reception for Queen Elizabeth in 1976. He asked her to dance. She said yes because he didn't stare at her chest. 6 months later, on December 4th, 1976, she married him at the peak of his campaign, wearing a gray wool dress and a smile that looked almost shy. Wedding number 6. For 5 years, she tried to be what he needed, the perfect political wife in tweed skirts and pearls, campaigning in small Virginia towns where people called her ma'am and asked if movie stars really kissed like that. She gained 60 pounds on country ham and loneliness. John was busy becoming Senator Warner. Elizabeth was busy becoming invisible. One night in 1981, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She filed for divorce the next morning. He didn't fight her. He just said, "Thank you for trying, Liz." Freedom tasted like vodka again, but this time she drank it with friends who didn't want anything from her. In 1983, a construction worker named Larry Fortensky checked into the Betty Ford Center for Alcohol Addiction. Elizabeth was there too, drying out after decades of pills and pain. They sat next to each other in group therapy. He was 20 years younger, tattooed, missing 2 teeth, and called her ma'am, even after she told him to stop. He made her laugh so hard she forgot she was famous. They started dating in secret. The world found out when paparazzi caught them holding hands at a Dodgers game. Headlines screamed, "Liz and the truck driver." Michael Jackson offered his Neverland Ranch for the wedding because no hotel would touch them. On October 6, 1991, Elizabeth Taylor, 59 years old, hair silver white, eyes still violet, walked down an aisle of white roses on the arm of her friend Michael, wearing a pale yellow Valentino gown, and married husband number 7 in front of 160 guests and $1 million worth of security. It lasted 5 years. Larry tried, she tried harder. But fame is a third person in every bed, and eventually even love can't outshout the cameras. They divorced in 1996 with kindness and a quiet settlement. He kept the dogs, she kept the memories. And that was supposed to be the end. But Elizabeth Taylor never did anything the way she was supposed to. In the years that followed, she turned her pain into power. She raised hundreds of millions for AIDS research when the world still whispered the word gay like a curse. She held dying men in hospital beds while politicians looked away. She wore her scars, tracheotomy, brain surgery, broken back, hip replacements like medals, and told David Letterman, "I've been through it all, baby. This is my body's way of saying, Elizabeth, you're still hot." She never married again. People kept asking why 8 times. She finally gave the real answer in 2006, sitting on a talk show couch with a glass of water instead of vodka, voice raspy from the hole in her throat, eyes still capable of stopping traffic. "I married every time I fell in love, and I fell in love every time I needed to feel alive. Some people climb mountains, some people jump out of planes. I married men who made my heart beat so loud I couldn't hear the fear. Every single one of them gave me something I needed at that exact moment: escape, safety, passion, war, laughter, dignity, or just someone to hold me when the pills wore off. I don't regret a single ring. I regret the times I stayed when I should have left, and the times I left when I should have fought harder. But I never regretted loving too much, only loving too little." She died on March 23, 2011, at 79, surrounded by her 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and the ghosts of 7 husbands who had once been the entire world. 8 weddings, 7 men, 1 woman who refused to die with her heart still locked in someone else's fist. And that, finally, is why Elizabeth Taylor married 8 times. Because every time life knocked her down, she got up, put on something fabulous, and loved again, louder, harder, and without apology, until the very last breath. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you even half as much as her life moved me, hit that like button, drop your favorite Elizabeth moment in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about the legends who refuse to live small. See you in the next one.